They say power corrupts, but in Redstone Ridge, Colorado, an entitled HOA learned that power can also be taken away. When they tried to bully the Carter family, a family whose roots in the land went back a century, they didn't realize they were messing with the very people who control the lights over their heads, the gates to their neighborhood, and even the water that flowed through their homes. This is a story of how one HOA picked the wrong fight and ended up sitting in the dark. The year was 1921, just after the First World War. The United States was changing rapidly. Soldiers were returning home, new towns were forming, and counties across the Midwest and West were selling off land cheap to attract settlers. In Redstone Ridge, most of the land surrounding a dusty river basin had been declared unfit for agriculture. The soil was poor, the winds kicked up violent dust storms, and attempts at farming had failed. But one man, Jonathan Carter, saw potential where others saw nothing. While others scoffed, he bought hundreds of acres at a bargain price. Not for crops, but for ranching. Ranching didn't need fertile soil. It needed space, grit, and water. Jonathan dug a cesspit, diverted water from the only river in the region, and planted fruit trees around his homestead. Slowly, over the years, the Carter Ranch thrived. That 1921 deed, stamped, sealed, and filed, will become one of the oldest property claims in the county. And that mattered, because it predated every zoning law, every subdivision, and every HOA that would later spring up around it. By the 1940s, the ranch was a success, but rural Colorado still lagged behind in one vital way: electricity. That's when Jonathan's son, Henry Carter, had an idea. He used the river cutting through their property to build a small hydroelectric dam. At first, it powered only the ranch, barns, pumps, refrigeration. But soon, the county noticed. They asked the Carters to expand it to provide power to nearby communities. The family agreed, but they had one condition written into the contract. If any community, governing body, or organization became antagonistic toward the Carter family, the Carters reserved the right to withdraw service. Desperate for electricity, the county agreed. And so, hidden in black and white legal language, a clause was created that would sit quietly for decades, waiting for the day it would finally be used. Fast forward to the 2000s. Redstone Ridge was no longer dusty ranchland. It was a booming suburb. Developers built subdivisions with names like Silver Creek Estates. With those subdivisions came homeowners associations. HOAs governed communities with strict rules: lawn height, paint colors, mailbox types. Some keep order, many abuse power. The Carter property wasn't part of any subdivision. Their deed was older by nearly a century. They had no ties to the HOA. But that didn't stop the HOA from trying. It started with letters, complaints about the ranch trucks parked by the road, demands to repaint the barn, threats of fines for livestock noises. Every time, the Carters responded the same way: "We are not members of your HOA. Your rules do not apply." But the HOA president, Richard Harlow, wasn't a man who liked hearing no. He organized patrols of HOA volunteers to sit outside the ranch snapping photos. He trespassed onto the Carter driveway, demanding they move equipment. He spread rumors at community events that the Carters were bad neighbors dragging down property values. When that didn't work, he went to the media. Local papers ran stories painting the Carters as outdated, irresponsible, even polluting the river. Headlines read, "Old ranchers refuse to modernize, community frustrated." The smear campaign worked. Strangers glared at the family in grocery stores. Children at school whispered about them. The Carters, who had lived peacefully for generations, were suddenly treated like pariahs. And Richard had allies. He had friends on the zoning board, even a cousin in the sheriff's office. Soon, code enforcement officers showed up weekly. Complaints of noise, waste, and building code violations. Each visit ended with nothing, but the stress was relentless. It wasn't just an HOA feud anymore. It was harassment from every direction. And that's when the Carters decided enough was enough. They pulled out the old contracts. The original 1940s agreement. The clause was still there, valid, enforceable. The HOA had made themselves antagonists. The Carters had every legal right to act. And so, for the first time in 80 years, they did. Paperwork was filed. Notices were sent to the county. And one summer night, the Carter family pulled the switch. Silver Creek Estates, so proud of their gates, their manicured lawns, their fancy clubhouse, went dark. No lights, no air conditioning, no internet. The gated entrance froze. Even the water pump slowed. The HOA had picked a fight with the wrong family. And now, everyone in the subdivision was paying the price. Chaos erupted. Homeowners flooded the HOA office demanding answers. Kids cried in the July heat. Parents couldn't work from home. Refrigerators spoiled. At an emergency meeting, Richard Harlow stood in the dark clubhouse with a flashlight in hand. He twisted the truth. He told residents, "The Carters are exploiting an outdated contract. They're holding us hostage for money." He painted the Carters as villains and urged the community to resist. And then, in a last desperate gamble, the HOA sued. For weeks, tension gripped Redstone Ridge. The Carters prepared for war. They dug out every deed from 1921, every contract from 1940, every letter of harassment. Their lawyer warned them, "Richard has powerful friends. This won't be easy." The courtroom battle began. Richard strutted in with a polished legal team, trying to frame the Carters as greedy relics standing in the way of progress. But when the Carters' lawyer presented the original contract, signed, sealed, and still valid, the room went silent. The clause was crystal clear. The Carters had the right to cut off service to any hostile community, and the pile of harassment letters only proved hostility beyond a shadow of doubt. After days of arguments, the judge delivered a thunderous ruling. The Carters had acted within their rights. The HOA lost. The court even reprimanded Richard for wasting resources and abusing county contacts. When the gavel fell, it wasn't just a victory, it was vindication. The fallout was brutal. News of the court ruling spread instantly. Residents, already furious about living without power, turned their anger on the HOA board. They realized Richard had lied, twisted the truth, and dragged the entire community into a legal disaster. Within days, lawsuits piled up, homeowners suing the HOA for damages. Richard Harlow resigned in disgrace. His allies on the board soon followed. And then, finally humbled, the HOA came crawling back to Carters. The Carters agreed to restore power, but only under new terms. Silver Creek Estates would now pay a premium annual fee directly to the Carter family. And in the new contract, ironclad protections ensured no HOA board or community body could ever interfere with the Carter Ranch again. The lights flickered back on in Silver Creek Estates. But the balance of power had shifted forever. The HOA went from threatening to fine the Carters to literally paying them to keep the community alive. From barren dust to a thriving ranch, the Carters had built something that outlasted wars, droughts, and generations. An entitled HOA? That was nothing. And so, the family who had been slandered and harassed reminded everyone of a simple truth. Never underestimate the neighbor who owns the river, the land, and the power running through your home. Because when you mess with the wrong neighbor, sometimes the whole community pays the price.